So this whole video is more broadly about, the honor code of black men. And it's not something I really hear much about um, within our community, in my opinion. The Oyo Empire, for those who may not know, Oyo was in southwestern Nigeria. And the Oyo Empire was pretty much one of the city-states of the Yoruba people. I'm sure, most of you have heard of the Yoruba people before. They're in, mostly southwestern Nigeria. And so kind of like, the Greek city-states, they had their own city-states. Even though they were one ethnic group, they had the same language and same culture, they still had sort of rivaling city-states, if you will. And Oyo was by far the most powerful city-state, and over time it became this large empire in southwestern Nigeria. It expanded into parts of modern day Benin as well. So yeah, Oyo was, yeah, they were a force to be reckoned with. And one of the reasons why Oyo became so powerful was because they had a cavalry unit. And in this forest zone, if you will, in Africa, in Nigeria, southwestern Nigeria, there weren't a lot of ethnic groups that had access to horses. And if they did, it was very difficult to keep those horses alive because, in that part of Africa, they had a very specific fly that, killed horses essentially. It was like a disease. But basically, the Oyo Empire was able to monopolize the trade in horses. And they had a really strong, powerful cavalry unit ultimately. And they used that cavalry to conquer and dominate the region for the most part. The origin of Oyo was about 1300, and then sort of the apotheosis of the empire didn't really come about until about the 17th or 18th century. Okay, so the honor code amongst the black men of the Yoruba people, I'd say, was very unique. And some would even say that it was pretty extreme as well. So basically, in the movie Woman King, it was featuring the Daomi Amazons, or the Mino. I believe they called themselves the Mino. There were several different terms or names for them. I have to look back in my notes for their specific term, what they called themselves. But we know them today in Western society as the Daomi Amazons. And they recently did a movie on the Daomi Amazons called The Woman King, and Viola Davis was featured in it. And in that movie, she was essentially fighting against the Yoruba people, the Oyo Empire, because Oyo was a tributary to, Daomi was a tributary to the greater Oyo Empire. And in the movie, there was a specific scene that pointed to the honor code of the Yoruba men of that time. And it was really, really interesting. And I wonder if you guys caught that scene. I forget the scene specifically, and I'm kind of paraphrasing, but basically the man, the general, the Oyo general at the time, he was in a very precarious situation. So I guess he felt like, he lost the battle or something like that. He didn't have many options, and he was telling, I guess, one of the soldiers or somebody, I don't know, I forget what it was specifically, but he basically said, hey, I can't go back to Oyo because they're going to force me to retire myself indefinitely through self-infliction. And he didn't say it like that, obviously, but so basically, think of the samurai, the samurai culture and the honor code, if you will, of the samurai. What they did was they did a similar thing, or the same thing that the people in the Oyo Empire were doing. And I find that really interesting because I really hope you guys know what I'm talking about. Just think of all the Japanese movies you've seen with the samurai and their honor code and things of that nature, and what the Japanese would do to ensure that they themselves and their family have honor ultimately. And it was the same way essentially, or very similar, within the Oyo Empire. Basically, when it came to the Oyo Empire, the general, if he did not meet some objective of the Oyo state, or if he failed in his mission, then they would force him to seppuku himself, if you will, in the African way, if you will. And the Oyo elites would tell the general, or would request the general, to actually do that. Now, I don't know if this actually happened in history. Like, I don't know if a general who actually did this, in the record or in oral history, but it is documented that this was part of their honor code. It's something really interesting to look into. It's something that I've never heard any African historian really mention like that for real. And I thought it was interesting because it was so similar to, I would say, Japanese culture. I don't know which one is older or whatever, but it's just very similar. And I've never heard of black men specifically on the African continent having that idea of honor, of having an honor code that way. Now that's more of like a military sort of honor code. Like the Yoruba have a general foundational honor code that's more applicable to the general society. But this is I want to say the most extreme, if you will, honor code from the military. I guess the point of it is to say that they took honor very, very seriously. And I think one way for us to define honor for Africans, or to make it more clear to us, is to understand what was dishonorable on the African continent. So one of the ways black men define honor is, I guess in reverse, was if you didn't have self control. That's one way they identified you lacking honor. When you abused your power, that's one way of lacking honor. When you were a coward, when you ran away, that was really big for the Zulus. Like you're not just gonna run away in a battle. It's not this individual system. It's more about the group. What is salubrious for the entire nation? What is healthy for the group? That is the foundation of what honor is ultimately. And when you break oaths, when you go back on your word, and when you bring shame to your family, ultimately, these are just general things where you lose honor. And I think in our society, in our modern society, I think we kind of touch on these things a little bit in different ways, but we never like it's never like coalesced into an honor code, if you will. Like there's no like honor like narrative. Like it's rare that you would go, at least in my opinion, from what I see, like it's rare that you would go to say somebody on social media. They would talk about these things again individually, but we don't really call it like honor like that. It's not brought together into, hey, be honorable. And I think that's interesting, because honor was very important. It was critical for African people, in particular Black men, on the African continent. That was a pretty big thing.